Hi everyone. Tonight I've got a very special guest, Bettina Arndt. Bettina Arndt's the author of several books, including What Men Want in Bed and Why Women Go Off Sex. But more recently, she's focused a lot on men's issues and has been a real spokesperson in that area. So, Bettina, thank you for coming on the YouTube channel.
Pleasure,
Really
Justin.
appreciate.
Very happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. And I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you is how how did you sort of make this journey from being, I guess, Australia's #1 sex therapist to being a really outspoken advocate for men's issues?
Well, of course, I started off in the sex therapy business because of women. I was training to be a clinical psychologist and got interested in feminism. Read The Female Eunuch, Germaine Greer's book, and got all excited about women's movement. And so that's how it all began. I wanted to help women. I wanted to improve women's love lives, and I thought, working to sex on sex education was a good place to start. But eventually, so I then went out there. I was actually involved in editing a little magazine called Forum, and it was an adult sex education magazine. And I did a lot of media, television, radio, and so on. And inevitably, what happened is men started to talk to me everywhere I went. Men would be hauling me aside to tell me their sex problems. It was very funny because it meant, my life was, I was constantly bailed up by men in various dark corners. But I started to really then think about what was happening to men. And if men talk to you about sex, they'll talk to you about anything, so they'd also then end up telling me their battles with the family court or whatever it was. And I started to think a lot about what it's like to be on the other side of the fence. And that's 40 years ago. I mean, it took me, and I've been interested ever since in trying to see both sides. But I did spend the first decade of my life adult life, very interested in women's issues. But I've done a complete about turn, really, because my feminism was about equality. It was about men and women having a level playing field. It wasn't about grinding men into the dirt. And I think feminism has absolutely gone off track and is now into the demonization of men and boys and setting up a whole range of situations where women are given advantage over men. And I'm just not interested in that. And I'm very keen now to expose what's happening to men and to boys as well.
Right. Yeah. So there's so many issues on this in this area. I mean, last year we had the Australian Human Rights Commission produce a report about a fabricated rape crisis on our campus, and I think that ties in really well with what you were saying about just how feminism has just completely gone off the deep end with things like slut walks and the whole demonization of men. So yeah, would you like to sort of talk about, do you,
Yeah.
is there any validity to these kind of claims
Oh,
that are being
you have to
made?
know what that's all about. The
Mm,
fake rape crisis on campus is a constructed campaign because the feminists are unhappy that in date rape cases, most juries won't convict a young man if it's a he says, she says thing where there's conflicting evidence and there's nothing much to help you decide who was telling the truth there. Juries don't convict. Juries are sensible. And it's pretty rare that a man will go down in that circumstance. Now, the feminists hate that. They want more rape convictions and they're determined to make this happen. So that's what they persuaded the Human Rights Commission to get out there and spend $1 million of our money on trying to prove there was a problem on campuses. And they failed dismally. I wrote this article saying, hooray, our universities are really safe places for our students. And I was the only journalist that first day. I was the only journalist in the country just about who was announcing it in that way. And everyone else was falling into the trap of looking at, they were beating up harassment as a major issue. Most of the harassment was actually unwanted staring. They found whatever it was, 1.6% over 2 years of women claiming they were being sexually assaulted. That included traveling to and from uni. That included involving people who weren't even other students. I mean, everything they could to get, alarming statistics, and they failed. And we should have been dancing the streets, celebrating that our universities are such safe places. I wrote to every vice chancellor in Australia and said, what are you doing? Scaring off overseas students and their families from studying here by pretending there's this huge problem. But they're absolutely captured by the feminists. And now they've turned around. I mean, they're introducing now, amazingly, student committees to investigate sexual assault on campuses. I mean, they're still at it. The feminists are never going to give up unless we really take them on and proves the lies they're peddling in our universities and prove the rubbish that's being taught in gender studies. I mean, look at Jordan Peterson. Various overseas people like Milo have been here pointing out what a lot of rubbish it is. Hardly anyone in our universities dares to say that.
Yes. Did you get a reply at all from any of those vice chancellors?
Oh, you should have seen those media departments running around like little rabbits or chickens with their heads off, and they came back with all these weasel words. None of them would say anything remotely sensible. They desperately sent me lots of strings of language that had nothing to do with what I was suggesting. It's really dangerous. I mean, it's not a joke at all. I think our universities are becoming extremely unsafe places for young men. I mean, this nonsense. You sing a sexy song that's been sung for generations in certain colleges, and now it's regarded as vile abuse of women, violence towards women. I mean, boys are getting into trouble for looking at women in the wrong way, for any way of interacting with women, and there's no responsibility placed on women to behave decently towards men. The whole sexual consent rubbish, which is about, should be about teaching, for a start, teaching students to stop getting pissed. I mean, that would be a really good start on our campuses to look at the issue of drug and alcohol abuse, which is one of the major variables when it comes to sexual assault on campuses. Most of the people in this situation are drunk. And if we could teach males and females to drink a bit less, it's not just about male restraint. I mean, we're putting which is reasonable. I mean, it's obviously reasonable to teach males to look for the signals to, this nonsense of checking every inch of the way whether you're allowed to. I mean, as you can imagine how well that's going to go down with most women. But I mean, the other side of the coin is teaching women to be responsible about conveying consent openly, about knowing their minds. How many women get pissed because they don't want to make a good decision around consent, and it's easier to just get carried away? Years ago, I was asked to do a producing job, sort of guest producer on Four Corners, on does no always mean no? And of course, the sky fell in. All these friends of the ABC were outraged that I was allowed to make this program. And I went out and interviewed lots of women about whether they ever have sex, where they want to get persuaded into it, where they don't give clear consent, where they, all the stuff that women do, and women readily admitted to it. But we're never allowed to talk about that anymore.
Well, Brendan O'Neill wrote a great article that I encourage people to read that defended the benefits and the joys of drunken sex, which was a bit of one of his better articles, I thought.
But drunken sex is rape now.
Yes,
but only if it applies to her, not to him.
Yes, yeah. I think that.
Sorry, I just want to say that, I mean, the issue of lack of responsibility when it comes to women is just outrageous. I mean, we expect women to be responsible when it comes to drink driving, and they will be culpable if they're in that situation. How come they have no responsibility when it comes to drunken sex?
Yes, yeah. It's kind of funny that in nature we've kind of gone the other way. That if you get your leg ripped off by a shark swimming in the water, everyone blames you for being in the water now. But if people things happen to them after they've been irresponsible, then they're not to take any blame for that.
Except for the men. The men get blamed for everything.
Oh, well, the men.
Quite straightforward. I just want to go back, because I meant to say, on the sex stuff, I did this wonderful video recently with the famous Karen Strawn. You know, you may know her. She's a wonderful, she's a honey badger. She's a men's rights activist in Canada. And we did this chat about how feminism screwed sex, which some of your young men might be interested in. Because I think, I meant to say to you at the time, I think sex is a very good example of how the whole, that playing ground has become distorted. Because we've gone from a situation where sex was part of the wifely duty back in the 1950s to a situation where women feel absolutely entitled to shut up shop if they're not interested. And the great tragedy around the world is that there's a growing desire gap between men and women, where women are much less likely to sustain interest in sex throughout their relationships. And feminists have done an outrageous thing in convincing women that sex isn't part of a normal give and take, where, you know, you do things for him that you may not feel like, you know, you cook meatballs for him even though you don't like them, but he likes them. You know, he does things for you that, and somehow sex is totally different. It's outrageous to suggest that women should sometimes have sex to make him feel good, have sex because they may end up feeling good, but even in the beginning, they don't really feel like it. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff around sex that's simply not being discussed. And the feminists have just closed that discussion down. I was once, when my book came out, I was speaking about this at ANU, and there were protesters in the streets saying, I'm not allowed to talk about this. This is sexual violence, to suggest that women had any obligation in a relationship.
I think I heard you make a speech at the time, National Press Club, making that same argument. It was the first time I've ever heard that argument. And we're going to talk about the family courts a little bit later on, but before divorce was as easy as what it is, if the wife did shut up shop, the man might have got a mistress or something like that. But of course now men have a gun to their head when it comes to the family court. They just have to put up with it.
Yeah, I used to have it when I was publishing all this stuff around sex. I had a website where I had a chat thing going, and a guy posted a letter saying, should I stay or should I go? And he hadn't had sex for years. He was in a marriage with young children. And he was desperately worried that if he left the marriage, he would never see his children again, which is a totally reasonable thing to worry about as a man in Australia. And there were hundreds of responses from men. I mean, very much split down the middle, from men saying, go, you know, you can't spend the rest of your life in a sexless marriage, to other men saying, no, it's not worth it. I mean, it's a fascinating debate, but you're right. I mean, the fact that women have so much power to unilaterally end relationships and to take men down in the process is one of the big issues in terms of inequity between men and women.
Yes. I'd just like to go back to sort of the aspect of responsibility, and because we had the Me Too movement recently, we had the Harvey Weinstein scandal, and one thing I noticed in the stories coming out from that, and also the Barnaby Joyce, and there were a few other things around the time, that they stopped using the terms sexual assault and sexual harassment, which have very definite legal terms and very clear definitions of consent, to using the term sexual misconduct, which the way I interpreted that was what you were saying, that people could decide afterwards whether or not they'd consented or not.
Yeah, what was that fat comedian that got into trouble?
Oh yes, Azim, the guy from Masters of None. Yeah,
I mean, that was classic. I mean, she thought he was a dud root. I mean, that was the essence of it. She goes back to his apartment. You know, she went down on him. He went down. All this stuff happened, and she decided afterwards he was hopeless, and so she names that, you know, sexual. She named it sexual assault. And that is just outrageous. I mean, I think the Me Too movement has gone way out of bounds. And it is part of an ongoing demonization of male sexuality that dates back. Do you know that the suffragettes in the 19th century had a slogan, votes for women, chastity for men? They wanted to, yeah. So think about that. And ever since, the feminists have been out telling men there's things wrong with it, with lusty male sexuality, that they're, you know, you're in trouble for looking at women in the wrong way, for having the wrong thoughts about women, for looking at sexy pictures of women, for pornography, for, you know, whatever it is, for not keeping your trousers zipped. I mean, whatever you do, you're in trouble. And there's been campaign after campaign out over this. And this is just the latest manifestation of that. And I think Me Too is really dangerous for women as well as men, because if men had any sense, why would they want to work with us? I mean, if I was a man running my own business, I wouldn't employ any women. I mean, that woman could turn around 20 years later and say, you know, you touched me the wrong way, or make allegations up that you have no way of refuting, and ruin your life.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I was reading through the registrar of the Australian Human Rights Commissioner complaints the last night, actually, and reading the breakdown of the different complaints, and it's sort of like, well, that could have happened. That could have just been an accusation. But when you see all of those different categories, the you know, whether it be sex or racial or what have you, you can see why a lot of employers would just avoid any of those kind of problems at all, which is not the exact opposite of what feminism and general equality is after.
Yeah, let alone women like me. There are many women out there who enjoy normal male-female interaction. That was part of the fun of working alongside men. A bit of banter, a sexy joke, you know, a wink, a nod, you know, the stuff that goes on between men and women. That was, and now all of that is being wiped out. I mean, men don't dare go near us, look at us, say anything to us. We've gone into all the workplaces, we've gone into all the male organizations, and instead of working alongside men, we've changed the organizations to suit us. Yes. I did this wonderful, you know, I'm doing YouTube videos now, and I did one the other day on men's sheds. Women are wanting to join men's sheds. Have you ever heard anything so ludicrous? And I went out and talked to all these blokes in their sheds about whether they let women in, and I mean, a big divide. I mean, most men said, you know, if women came in, I'd be out the door. I mean, no way they wanted, because it was all about that male culture and the idea that there was something special about that male culture that needed to be preserved, and that men who are at risk, I mean, older men are the group in our society at greatest risk of suicide. And part of the motivation of the men's sheds was the idea that men will open up perhaps with other men more, they're more likely to do that than perhaps with women around. And that's certainly, and that's what I hear from a lot of the sheds, that they are doing a good job in looking after lonely men and vulnerable men. And if women are around, the men won't talk. And yet there are these virtue signaling, brown nosing men in our society who think it makes them look good to invite the women in. And I had this really hilarious interview with one of those.
I did watch that interview, yeah.
And I mean, it's just outrageous. And of course, that is part of the problem. The problem with what's happening between men and women in our society is not just about the feminists. It's about the men like Malcolm Turnbull who think that it makes them look good to constantly try to win brownie points from women, to say domestic violence is all about, you know, male perpetrators, it's all about respect for women, when that's a blatant lie and he knows it. I mean, all the research shows that most family violence is two-way violence involving women as well as men. And yet we have every major organization in our country is singing from this false song sheet which alleges domestic violence is just about terrible men and nothing about violent women.
Oh, and it's worse than that. It's not just only blaming men. It's also blaming the cause in the wrong place. It's all built around a wrong theory that domestic violence is the source of it is the society's attitude towards women, and that's not the case at all. It's the source is poverty and alcohol and
and drug and alcohol and all that. And of course, it's very much more common in certain communities than in other communities, and they always say, "Oh no, it's everywhere." I mean, they're telling a bunch of lies about domestic violence, and it's all about a big cash cow for the feminists. These millions of women employed around the world promoting false propaganda about domestic violence, and they've done very well out of it.
Yes, yeah. I'd like to go back to your comment on cowardly men. Is that it just seems everywhere at the moment in our corporations, in our government departments, that there's these men who have who are at the top, who they look around and they see all of their other people at the top are like them, old white men. And they think, you know what, I don't want to give this up. You know what I'll do is I'll kick the chair out of young white men and give their opportunities away, and I'll make myself look good in the process.
Yeah, and the women will love me.
Yes.
You're right. It is absolutely everywhere. Men doing that. Look at Qantas with their nonsense about, what, you're not allowed to talk about husbands and wives anymore. All this gendered language stuff. There's virtue signaling in organization after organization, and we should be out there protesting about this. We should be saying, I'm not flying Qantas anymore because you're promoting a lot of rubbish and you're spending my money paying HR people to produce this total crap.
Yes, yeah, it's you could get me started on that. That all these people who are making huge salaries, best parts of $1 million kind of money, to be diversity and inclusion officers, and have the gall to lecture the rest of us about equal opportunity.
In my chat to Jordan Peterson, he was saying, anyone with parents with children in a school, the minute they hear the word diversity, inclusion, all these catchphrases, they should walk out. They should remove their children from those schools. And I've suggested, for the whole of Victoria's public school system would be emptied for a start, and most of the other states as well. But it's not a joke. It's really dangerous, and you've got all this total rubbish about gender fluidity mixed in there. There's issue after issue that have totally gone off the rails.
Yes, yeah, it's gone completely out of control. So now let's talk about the family courts for a bit. So what are the challenges you're seeing with these men you're talking to? Like what are they facing when their marriages do break down? Like what's happening to them?
Look, it's interesting. I've been terribly involved with this. I first started writing about it in the 1980s, a long time ago. And I was just one day sitting there and I got this letter, a snail mail letter. You probably don't even know what they look like, from a family court judge who wrote to me. He was retiring and he said, we've made a huge mistake. We've given too much power to the custodial parent. And of course, the women always got custody in those days. And with that power comes, all when you make a woman a custodial parent, it gives her absolute license to do what she likes. She can move from one part of the country to the other. She gets most of the money, gives her enormous power and influence. And he was amazing. He gave this fabulous interview. And I then wrote about that. And I was on a whole bunch of government committees. This was under John Howard. John Howard, people don't, I know a lot of people don't like John Howard for various reasons, but he was an amazing prime minister because he listened to what was going out there in terms of normal social interactions between men and women. He stood up for fathers I don't think we'll ever see a politician like him again. He argued about the importance of fathers in children's lives. He snuck me onto all these committees. I was really there representing men, because what the bureaucrats were doing, they would choose men for those committees who were not going to do a particularly good job lobbying for the men. There were men running men's groups who weren't particularly impressive, and the women's groups were wiping the floor of them, because women's groups, are extremely powerful, educated women, and they're just so professional. And most men won't join a group of people they see as losers. So the well-educated professional men don't usually join men's lobby groups. And it's left to the guys who have no choice, who don't know where else to go, who often end up running these groups. And it was just so interesting for me being in the middle of all of that. But we did some fantastic things. And Howard introduced this presumption of joint parental responsibility, which just shifted the goalpost for a little while there, to forcing judges to take that as a starting point, this idea that children have a right to access to both parents. And that's where we start this discussion. And of course, what happened? Howard got thrown out. The coalition was out, Labor was in, and they systematically undermined those reforms. And the way they've mainly done that is with the violence card. They have introduced this idea that, you can start off with this idea of shared parenting, of, joint parental responsibility. But if there's any violence, well, you can't have that. And of course, what's happened now is most cases that go to court have AVOs attached to them, have allegations. I would think there's no question a lot of them are false allegations of violence or sexual abuse, which are a really powerful weapon in family court battles. And, lawyers and magistrates, lots of people have admitted this is happening and see it as a major problem with the family law system. But it's tilted the whole imbalance. We've got a law reform commission is just about to do a new inquiry into family law, and someone wrote to me the other day and said he counted it up. The terms of that commission, there are 233, I think it's 223 references to violence in those terms of reference, and not a single mention of women denying the man contact with the children, of women not complying with contact orders, of all of the dreadful things women do to drive the fathers out of the children's life, don't get a mention, because they're so busy beating up this idea that it's all about violent men.
Yeah, I don't understand how someone can get away with violating a court order. I really don't. That if any of us violated a court order on just about any other issue, they'd throw you in jail.
Yeah, well, if you don't pay child support, there's a chance you end up in jail. And they could garnish your wages. They have enormous power to take action on that. The family court, in theory, has always had power to take action against women who break their orders, and hardly ever happens. And most women know they can get away with it.
Which I find incredible. I mean, it would be so easy. It would be so easy for the courts just to enforce it. I mean, if people thought it was,
I tell you what the problem is. There's always this idea of the mother has to look after the children. If we put the mother in prison, the children will suffer. And it's the whole thing is now so staged. If you take an apprehended violence order, by the time that's sorted out, the man is most likely not to have seen the children for years. And so then they look at the fact that he's had very little contact with the kids, and therefore, the children are used to living with the mother. So it goes on. I mean, it's always the sort of status quo that counts the most in that sort of situation. And even though that dad might have been an incredibly involved dad when they were originally together, none of that counts if the woman has set up a new scenario. That's what will apply when it comes to making the actual decision. I mean, look, it's not fair to say this is across the board. I know, and I've worked for years with men, good lawyers who have been advocating for men, and some of them are now judges who are working really hard to make sensible decisions around these issues. There are, good people in the system who are trying to do something about it. But overall, there's no question the family law system as it exists now is so unfair, not only to men, but to children, because the figures on the children after divorce are just tragic. How few have a reasonable relationship, a lasting relationship with both parents. It's just a really rare thing.
And that opens a whole other can of worms that that no one wants to talk about is of course how bad single parent households are for children. That the statistics are pretty clear on it. Yet we do all kinds of things for where we have much less evidence. Yet we're quite happy to create all these incentives to break up families. Yet even though we know that even though that growing up in a single parent household is a very good predictor of bad things happening to you. Yeah.
No question, no question. And the research is overwhelming on that two parents are better than one. And we are so nervous of talking about the whole single parent issue. I once gave a lecture on the Festival of Dangerous Ideas.
Oh yes, yeah.
And the lecture was on some families are better than others for children. That's a dangerous idea, when in fact we have 50 years of research showing precisely that, showing that children are more at risk. I mean, where is the area of our society where children are most at risk of sexual abuse? It's not Catholic priests, let me tell you. It's not Boy Scout leaders. It is mum's boyfriend. And children living in families where there are a lot of stray men passing through that family are incredible risk of sexual abuse. And I've had men over the years contacting me. I mean, can you imagine what that's like for the dad to know that these feral men are involved in the lives of his children and putting them at risk when he can't do it? And if he goes to docs, nothing happens, but he can report it and report it and report it, and he's treated as a nutter.
Yes. I believe that speech is on YouTube, isn't it? That one you gave for the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, because
I think, it's out there. Yeah,
I think I've seen it, and I remember the audience just just shocked.
It was a packed audience, and they were interested in this. I mean, I just think this is a fascinating example of the way feminists are willing to sell out other women, because the real issue is, if feminists used to go to developing countries, to India or Indonesia, and they would say to women, the really important thing is for you to control your fertility and not to have children until you're capable of supporting them. You need to get educated first. You need to get your adult life together first. And we wouldn't dream of saying that in Australian schools, would we? We wouldn't dream of saying it's not a good idea, young women, to have kids on your own that you can't afford to keep. The only reason you can afford to keep them is we're paying for them. Because you will really disadvantage yourself when it comes to your education and your life prospects. You'll disadvantage yourself when it comes to chances of a future relationship, stable future relationships. Marriages involving other people's children are very unstable in the main. All these issues just never get talked about because feminists have decided to champion women's right to have children in any circumstance they like.
Well, it's become a big thing in our culture that we should never judge anyone. Doesn't matter what decision they make, that people are entitled not to be judged.
No. We have to judge men in every conceivable circumstance, but we should never judge women. You've got the rule wrong.
That's true. I wouldn't mind going back to the issue of men's groups. That it seems to me that the Men's Shed was like the only organisation that men were allowed to have, which I can see for a lot of, especially older men, the value of that organisation. But not all men want to be making wooden toys for orphanages. Like a lot of men would just want to sit around and drink whiskey and smoke cigars and read the newspaper. And and we're not allowed to have those kinds of organisations. Yet in the news the other day, just yesterday actually, there was a pushy feminist lawyer who took a daughter to a barber and demanded a haircut. He said no, and now she's taken him to the Human Rights Tribunal.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's just, oh God. I can hardly bear to open the newspapers to see what madness women are up to now. And that's not to say, I hear from lots of sensible women. Not all women are like that. You look at the number of women who call themselves feminists now. It's what, 7% or
7%, yeah. That was a UK study, I think. Tiny.
And I hear from students at uni all over the country really upset that they're being fed ideology and propaganda instead of being taught about the world and politics. And I mean, lots and lots of women write to me about what's happening in their workplaces, and they're annoyed that these dysfunctional, self-righteous, neurotic women are determining the way men and women are supposed to interact with each other now. I mean, there are lots of women who don't like what's going on, but the feminists, the extreme feminists, have such a grip on our society, and they're so dangerous.
Well, the reality is it only takes one person in a group. Say you're on a team at work, and everyone's telling in poor taste jokes and teasing each other gently and all of that kind of thing. And then you've got one person who joins the team, and they're on the phone to the HR department, and that's the death of that culture. So it's really put the way the incentives are in our system, where you can drag an employer to the Human Rights Commission, you can do all kinds of things. It really only takes some person, and this is not just feminists too. This is people who have low self-esteem in general and whatnot. All it takes is one person to sort of join an organization, and they can absolutely kill the culture with the tools they have available to them.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have to start standing up against all this rubbish. I mean, that's the real lesson. Not all women use this weaponry they're handed when it comes to separating from their husband to demolish him. I mean, I don't know whether you've ever heard Karen Strawn talk about that. She was divorcing her husband, and the lawyers kept on saying, "Oh, you could do this. You could take this money from him." And she said, "No, I'm not going to do. I'm not interested in destroying him." We can stand up against the rubbish HR rules. We could object to the way to say, no, we want to be called guys. We want to be called whatever it is. We can take our children out of schools. We can. We need to start to rebel and take them on. And that's what I'm spending my whole life now making YouTube videos to try to rally the masses and to get people to contact me when they hear of stories. And so I think there are a lot of people out there really unhappy about what's happening in relation to gender issues in our society. And we're in the majority. I mean, it's the minority that is imposing all that stuff on us. And that's why we have to get active, all of us.
I agree with you 100%. Now, before we sort of wrap up, I know you've spoken a lot about men's health issues. So we're constantly buying pink branded products, pink ribbon products. You would have thought they would have cured some of these conditions by now with the amount of products we've bought, but yet we rarely hear about men's health. And I know you've done quite a few videos on that issue. So would you like to share your thoughts on men's health?
Well, you might want to have a look at. Did you see my ball tampering video?
I did, yes.
I just did this video. I was watching all the shot we saw 1,000 times. The poor cricketer with his hand down his trousers, and I thought, and I suddenly realised this month is Testicular Cancer Awareness Month, and the real tragedy is that testicular cancer is a really rare cancer, yet it's the second highest killer of men under 40, cancer killer of men under 40. And that's because we never talk about it. I mean, women, look, women have done a fantastic job in getting women to examine their own breasts and to talk about stuff that once was really taboo. And we need to do the same with men. And whether that's testicular cancer or prostate cancer or male suicide, and there's so many health issues that never get properly discussed. And there is a very big job to do to get the messages out there.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you've been doing that. I mean, we just got to get the message out there. So how can people support you in your work? What can they do to help you in getting the message out there?
The most important thing, I suppose, is the videos, because that's what I'm focusing most on now. And I mean, even that ball tampering video, I'd love it to go viral. So please see it. Go onto my website or go onto my YouTube channel, and you'll see the links, and you can send it out there. I sent it to every sporting organisation we could think of that was targeting young men, and hope that they would just spread the word on that. But I mean, I'm exposing what's happening in universities. I mean, talking about a range of issues, and I'm constantly saying I'm lead volunteers. I have people helping me. I have lawyers helping me bail out poor guys who get into trouble here or there. I have graphic artists. I mean, I really need, because it's all voluntary. No one's earning any money out of this, as you know. No way to get rich. But it is fantastic. And I'm getting a lot more support. I'm getting a few people sending the odd dollar or two to me, which is lovely.
You've got a Patreon account, don't you?
I've got a Patreon, and I've also got a PayPal. So, I often get $1 or $2. Sometimes I get $50, which is very exciting. No, but it's just nice to know people are supporting you, and literally every dollar helps. But I also very keen to hear from people, and to hear what's happening in your workplace or in your university, or to get the stories, to put them together. I'm going to do a whole series of just people's personal stories about what's happening in the family court, what's happening with the AVOs, different areas. And we sometimes have to disguise people if they can't be openly shown. I've got a young man who is accused of sexual violence in the university campus, and we've got a little photo of him. Those shadow photos where you don't show his face. We've got little horns and a devil tail, because he's being portrayed as the devil in this. Anyway, I mean, we have to find ways of showing, disguising people who can't be shown, and that's going to be part of the, but that's necessary in cases where people are really vulnerable in terms of their public reputation.
Yes. Okay. Well, anyone watching this, so if you've got a story to tell, please reach out to Bettina. And well, look, thank you for all of the great work you've been doing and coming on the show today. Really appreciate you coming on.
It's been very nice talking to you.
Great, thanks.
Good.